So we're here together today to talk about being the change and what that means for us and has meant for us for some time now, what our vision of that might be, and where the energy is for us. So what are the words we're using in that, and what do they mean?
It's good that we've come to this point, especially because being the change is a bit like that Salvador Allende quote as well. To be young and to not be revolutionary is a contradiction. But the point being that it's if we're not trying to work out who we are becoming, but also engaging with the many initiatives already, which is part of posing the solution, then we're doing a lot of wasting time that we right now don't really have. And I think that's the energy that's coming from young people who want to know the concrete solutions and initiatives. And this conversation really is part of moving us in that direction, but also recognizing that around the world, the majority of the world's peoples are either seeking that change, already being that change, demonstrating that change, showing the alternatives, or that our inability to recognize that change that's happening, or our inability to reach out or make those connections is inhibiting that change from taking place. So it's really important that I think when we're talking about, we start with being the change, is understanding that it's a constant and evolving process that already invokes a global picture of a world that's turning, of people who are rising up in rebellion, of people who are rising up and moving to the next thing because there is no alternative. And to avoid talking that conversation for the large majority of people is already to accept death, or to accept suicide, or to accept that society is out, to the detriment of our communities. So that's kind of like a nice starting point, I think, from us about why this conversation right now is so timely, but also speaks to, the responsibility we have right now.
I think what I would say is Extinction Rebellion has been around for 3 years, and it was founded on some principles and values, and there's a lot of them that we haven't really figured out how to do them. We've sort of worked out, in some ways, the easy bit, how to do in Western societies some civil disobedience, and it has some impact. But it's within our societies, and what I would say is I don't even think we have a culture. Really what we have is a disease, and it's called wetiko in the Algonquin languages. It's a paradigm of domination, of taking, of extracting, and we're all in it. We all have parts of it that shows up. And the way I experience it is that it has no roots. And the roots of togetherness are the things that we can do right now when we talk about repairing the harm. The roots of being a global family together, seeing each other, listening to each other, being there for each other. They're not things that we have to wait for. We're not asking power for permission for that. And I don't see how we're going to take on a paradigm of domination through acts of attempting to do domination ourselves. I mean, it's a self-optimizing paradigm. It knows how to resist people if they're not together. We really have to have each other's backs. And I think especially at these times it's about eldership, mentoring, sharing, and just to be practical about it. I mean, I think we're here to talk today, and we'll see what comes from it. The kind of thing that we can do are sort of open space, open source gatherings. Gatherings of the human family globally, where we can bring our songs and our voices and our stories of resistance to be together. And there are ways in which you can have those spaces organised so that people can connect on the thing that they need some support on, or they want to be heard on. Really beautiful ways that we've figured out to be together and find the other people that want to have that particular conversation. So I'm really excited about what we could birth together. I think getting this fractal right, this seed, feels like pregnant with possibility in our motherist ways, that maybe I'll use that word to segue into you, Esther, because I love that phrase you've just introduced. If you want to talk to that.
Okay, sure. So For me, in terms of a vision of being the change, it is about a return to the ways of our mother. And by mother, I mean our earth mother, our mother earth, that has birthed all of us, that connects all of us. And learning how to connect again to our mother earth through land, through our connection to land, our connection to community, our connection to our peoples, all of this which we've been separated from. And this paradigm, this Wetiko paradigm, some of us from African heritage communities refer to Yurugu, how that has impacted on us in terms of separation. And as we were talking about earlier, the repair is about repairing that breach with our mother. We also refer to that in other language such as planet repairs, this nexus between reparatory justice, environmental and cognitive justice, because the very way that we even conceive and conceptualize each other, our relationship to our Mother Earth, and also the resources of our Mother Earth, which have become commodified and capitalized, and the pursuit of so-called tangible forms of wealth, which has made us literally lose our minds, lose our humanity, lose our souls and our sense of purpose and connection. And that is also the case for peoples who have been colonized. This is not about an us or them, because dehumanization has been inherent within that process. And it has impacted on all of us to different degrees and in different ways. And so as a reparationist, it is about, first of all, stopping that harm. And the being the change is about promoting the alternative ways of being, the alternative ways of relating, repairing our relationships as well, which have become fractured. And this is one of the aspects that I think has been most missing in certainly the journey of those of us who have been part of Extinction Rebellion from its beginning, actually, especially those of us in Extinction Rebellion Internationalist Solidarity Network. We've always raised this. It's not always been understood. But we're now at a time where we can no longer keep, as Gail has said, appealing to other structures and other people's power to emancipate us. We have to do that. And actually, as we have been saying in Extinction Rebellion Internationalist Solidarity Network, our communities who have been in resistance for centuries have been leading the way. And they have been maligned. Our knowledge systems have been belittled and demonized. And it's now time to restore that equilibrium, that balance. What this world needs is a restoration of that balance. Because we can no longer afford our species and those of other non-human species, we can no longer continue down this path. So for me, the being the change relating to a restoring of also matriculture. This is not about matrilineal societies or patrilineal or patriarchy or a matriarchal. It's about how we're relating to our Earth Mother. And the fact that the culture derives from the earth, and our connection to earth. Everything that we rely on to sustain us, our food, our seeds, our foodways, all this carries and embodies a culture of a people, and certainly of our species. So yes, that's in the sense of motherism. It is an African perspective, alternative to what has come out of the West in terms of feminisms, that embraces a holistic relationship between people whatever gender they may be, or however they self-define, but also the relationship between our Earth Mother that sustains all of our lives. And it's about a reordering, a restructuring, a rebuilding, a renewing, a reclaiming, a regenerating of all that has served us well and all that we need to keep in order to take us into the future. So it's actually a future where we create other worlds, but that future is here in our present. It's not something when we pass or leave this earth. And that sense of pluriversality in terms of a multipolar world of many worlds is what we are in the process of co-creating and connecting into. And there are many examples of communities in resistance, of resistance, in the global south who have shown us concrete societies, communities that they are building, ways of life that actually are about a return to matriculture, are about a return to Mother Earth, are about stopping the harms of extractivism, stopping the harms of this separation and this commodification of all life.
Yeah, actually, for me, that all that you've all said sets the scene for also beginning to think through the vision in terms of its practicalities. Because when we talk about the vision of a world without the Mangamizi, a world without Wetiko, a world without Irugu, and show that this is impossible without undoing the harm of coloniality. Some people find it difficult, to picture that world, without all of these atrocities of, colonization, and seem to find it so hard, to let go of this harmful, reordering of what, from the very beginning, the peoples of the world as one global human family, understood so well, and the evidence, is there in the history that we've all met together, everywhere, which has been so hidden away from us and distorted, which, some people are now, beginning to bring it out, which emphasizes the correctness of the view that many of our indigenous scholar activists, pointed to long ago about the possibilities, and the capabilities of our one human family, creating a world without us harming each other, because that is their experience. That is what the history of the world truly, tells us. And for me, this is the time after, yes, some of us have come from, this, being involved in making this journey, and Extinction Rebellion has been a meeting point, where we've encountered others, who, doubt this, past of humanity, doubt these possibilities of moving from this present of harm, to even a present, not just a future, beginning to create a present without harm, that takes us into a far more beautiful future, for many, many generations. And the practicalities are just, first and foremost, being the change means being the change to stop the harm. And it is, mind-boggling that some people will think that with all that, we have accumulated in terms of knowledges, with all that, we have demonstrated even human beings are capable of doing, with all that Mother Earth herself, demonstrates in terms of the power of nature, not just its beauty, but the power of nature, to do literally the impossible.
Yes.
Right? We still doubt that we can stop the harm and create a far more beautiful world where we restore the familyhood, of all of us, not just of human beings, but of everything else, because we are all connected. And the practicalities are that first and foremost, we can say no more harm.
Yeah.
And bring the power within and without ourselves to bear on ensuring that we do not allow anybody to do further harm to our Mother Earth. And by bringing ourselves, back to be that force that safeguards Mother Earth from any further harm, we would demonstrate the power to be that change that brings the world away from this precipice, from this falling over, this cliff, that some people are rushing headlong, into. And we do that by just being there for each other. We do that by, ensuring that no matter, what nooks and crevices, harm is happening in this world today, we can bring the unifying power of our peoples, to be with those, people who are suffering that harm, in a collaboration effort, to ensure that the harm stops.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is in proving that we have the power to stop that harm anywhere on the planet today that we begin to actually heal ourselves. Because when we realize the healing force of our unifying power and what we could do with that force to ensure that each and every human being, on this planet is safe, that we restore our familyhood, that we begin to care again for ourselves, and for every being on the planet. That the wastefulness of just grabbing, extracting, consuming, to spill out so much, rubbish on this planet, we can stop that. And it is in that process of ensuring that the school children who are crying out in Ghana today, why are they suffering so much in their homeland? Community activists who are being murdered across the world, that we can bring the unifying power, of our peoples, to defend them, and that we can then begin to see the beauty that will emerge from just one simple thing, our togetherness. That Bob Marley, put in these beautiful words of one love. I mean, it is mind-boggling that in this day and age, with so much accumulation of knowledge, with so much, harm, and the consequences of that harm, that the one thing that seems to escape us is the ability to demonstrate the kind of love in which we see protection.
Yes.
And we see that the life of one actually is the life of all of us.
Yeah.
And this is what will make, our rebellion for life meaningful. When again, it is one for all and all in the bosom of Mother Earth. This is what being the change means to me.
It reminds me of, sorry, just quickly, Cornel West, I think, says something like, love is what justice looks like in public.
Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, the Stop the Mangamese campaign, we also say stopping the harm is the first step to repairing the damage.
Yeah. And Martin Luther King said something like, the work of justice is correcting everything that stands in the way of love. Yeah. That's what we want so much more than justice and rest, and it will come from love, and it will be love in action. Fierce love.
Exactly.
Love that comes from the mothering principle, which sometimes I've described as the principle of protection, the principle of care, and the principle of creation, and
Regeneration.
of that, exactly, right? Of life force, of new life, of life calling for life. And what you're talking about is reminding me, so in this vision that we're sitting with together with many others, because it's here, many people are talking about this across the globe, right? Is this restoring as we, to restore, to remember and repair. There's a restoring that's needed now, because the dominant culture, that is perhaps no culture at all, has a big story, right? It's a story, the hero's journey, that there's some power out there that we have to ask for change from, that it's not us. There's an imagined salvation. But what if it's us? What if it's being our change, And what does that look like? So what part of the work, I know our work has been together, is thinking about the language, the new language around that, and the new stories of that, right? And sometimes what's happened is that when you introduce new stories and new language, they're very challenging. It's very challenging. And people go, well, I don't get that. What does that mean? What do those words mean? So when we've spoken about pluriversality between us, for example, and when we've spoken about co-liberation in the movement, people are, it's tricky. What does that mean? What do those words mean? What is this new story that might be compassing us towards? And I'd love us to talk a bit about that.
Well, you see, for me, people who go off that tangent, whilst I admit that there are some people who may, be hearing those words for the first time and who may be wondering what they mean. And, we need to spend time with those people in, honest dialogue to deconstruct, and construct together with them, to unlearn and learn together with them, be prepared to listen to each other's stories, each other's experiences, each other's perspectives, and explore what these things mean, right? So that's on the one hand. But there are also people who use this thing that I don't get it as, a way to say I don't want to get it, right? This challenges my privilege, which I don't want to let go of, right? This challenges my notion of superiority and supremacy, and, exploring this, going into it, threatens my feeling of superiority. So I don't want to go there. And I think that those people, we need to really force through the challenge. And people cry, some people will, cry about being traumatized and so on. And I want to tell those people my own experience. I was born in a country, which got colonized, by Britain. That's then, imposed upon us a language and a knowledge system, and said what we had meant absolutely nothing. And I went to school, suffering the epistemic violence, of the English language and everything English, but I was meant to feel that that's the only way I could learn, right? And even though everything was crying out, around me, that it was so unjust, the violence of subjecting an African in the land of his birth, to a language and system of knowledge that completely, destroys everything that they know, everything around them, everything that is so dear they have from their family, they have from birth, and say that is backward, that is inferior, that is stupefying. And the only thing is what comes from Europe. Europe you have not set eyes on. Europe that means absolutely nothing to you. But these are the images, that you're supposed to get and accept that is not. That violence that some of us have survived.
Yes.
And we are survivors of that, epistemicide,
Yes.
within which they destroy within us, not that our own indigenous cultures, and they destroy our own indigenous personalities.
Yes.
They destroy who we truly were brought by Mother Earth onto this earth to be, right? And then we live that caricature of a life to be able to understand and communicate with you in this violent language of English. Right?
Absolutely.
And then when we are trying to get you to understand some of the words coined in your own language, right? To give some sort of, expression to what we mean by decolonization, by pluriversality, by intersectionality, then you want to claim you don't want to understand. It is your own language in which we have been forced, right, to learn and develop certain concepts, to express our experiences. And you want to pretend that after all that violence of wanting to even communicate with you to reach some dialogue, you are still running away from it. I mean, the arrogance of these people has to be called on. I have no sympathy for it, right? And that is not to say that, I do not see the point about people who will come and say, oh, what does that mean? Where is it coming from? What meaning do you give to it? What experience does it describe for you? Let's reason through that. I respect that. But those who, with their arrogance, want to keep us wallowing in obscurantism and therefore prevent other people from, making the difficult journey of navigating, these expressions for us to reach some common understanding, through dialogue. Those people have no time for them at all.
So when I'm listening to you, and then in light of our conversation a short while ago, where we were talking about really the vision and what's actually bringing us together, keeping us together and inspiring us to recommit to this path, I also think about this book, A Course in Miracles, which I'm not sure if people have read. And one of the things that always struck me about that is it says there are really only two emotions, love and fear. And everything that people do is motivated by one or the other. So yes, that arrogance is coming from a place of fear.
Yes. Yes.
It's coming from a place of fear. Fear of change, fear of difference, fear of giving up, a false reality, a notion of who we are, a fear of retribution that might be deep in people's psyche because we carry this. And so I think when we're talking about being the change, it is also about a new way, not a new way, it's about restoring holism to our dismembered pieces of ourselves and recognizing this sense of alienation that many of us, racialized differently, bodied differently, or what have you, have come to be socialized into. That's what I think about.
And so
in terms of the that motherist tendency within me, which has to be able to see the whole vision, the whole picture, even in relation to when we're trying to transform our present reality from what it is into what we would like it to be.
But you see, for me, the thing about the fear, even though I understand that, for some it will be fearful, I think it also flies in the face of experience, right? This is a country which took upon itself, pronouncing the majority of humanity to be subhuman. And to go and take over their lands, right? And do with it what has brought us to this worldwide climate and ecological crisis point, right? But within that period of hundreds of years, right, apart from the majority of humanity in perpetual rebellion against, that violation of, the rights of Mother Earth that we all have, right? There have been people who've risen from within the society, right? Who've challenged it, right? Who've refused to be part of this supremacist myth, with which some people have become intoxicated, right? And who have, with immense sacrifice, written, some of the most beautiful chapters of world history with the majority of the peoples of the world. That this state, when it suits it, claims for itself, right? The movement against the chattel enslavement of African people, right? It was not the ruling classes of this country, who started it. It was started from below, right? But ordinary people who eventually saw common cause, as also experienced some form of enslavement and rose against the grain with violent persecution, people being hung, drawn, and quartered, right? But they persisted, and then wrote that chapter that today is claimed as Britain played this role in the abolition of chattelism. But also let's look at the empire upon which they claim the sun would never set, who compelled its dismantling. It was still ordinary people of the majority world, with people from this country who also rebelled against empire. And now, of course, the credit for the world to some extent, with nations you can no longer call, officially your colonial domains, Britain claims credit for it. So for me, it's the same thing of today. Why is it that those people can't look into their own history and see the very British, right? Men, women, and even children, young people who rose up, together with the majority of humanity to make these changes, who made themselves the change, at a particular time without begging, royalty and empire, to grant them the right to be the change in those times. So for me, it's disingenuous on the part of present generation. There's so much to learn from that real story of this country, our story that we all as the world of humanity have created in this country. Right? If you don't want to look at that story as it is there in Africa, or it is there in Asia, or it is there in Abiyala, look at our story in Britain and wake up to it. So, if you wake up to that truth, if you have the courage to face that truth,
and you have to,
then that fear should disappear.
And to me, to have the courage, you have to also eliminate that fear. Because all of who you're talking about, they had challenges, they would have had obstacles, they would have had people from maybe in their family or their own circles who were like, why are you doing this? Why should this matter to you? They had to overcome those fears and do what they were doing anyway.
Yeah. That's why I think it's helpful that we started with this idea of motherism, right?
Yes.
Because anyone that hears who has had a mother or just engaged with the concept of motherly love won't deny that love is really painful and it is difficult.
Yes.
And it includes that fear, mothers' fear for their children's safety.
Yes.
All of these things
Yes.
are real, very concrete
Yes.
feelings that we all know and
Yes.
have.
Yes.
And so the failure will be on any people that take up the banner of being the change. It will be on us if we try and present this as a new story.
Yes.
Precisely as Uncle has said, because
Yes.
you've got the situation where the violence of this country is that we are denied the true history,
Yes.
that we are denied the truth of how we got here.
Yes.
We're denied all of that resistance. And so if being the change, if the place that we are being challenged to grow confidence to step into doesn't mean to remember and connect in the present
Yes.
tense, in a communion
Yes.
of all the other people around
Yes.
the world who
Yeah.
look like
Yes.
us, who are being the change,
Yes.
and who are inviting us to come along on that journey.
Yes.
And we see that as a whole new thing,
Yeah.
rather than in telling other people to take us,
Yeah.
Yeah.
do you mean like, look, this is something that is very present and is very much within us, then people will fail to engage with this idea.
Yeah.
And that is also a burden on anyone who wants
Yeah.
to take that step forward. And that's why I think we feel so passionately about it in this room, because these are our families.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
These are our communities.
Yes.
And if we can't talk about the world we're trying to build, or the world that needs saving, then we're wasting our time.
But these are the very peoples, right, in the Ubuntu sense, who make us human,
Precisely.
right? You know, if not yourself, look at how you become human.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yes.
peoples across the world today, the vast majority of peoples of the world are in rebellion in one way or the other. Nobody needs you to incite them from Britain to rebel against the injustices that the global order is imposing upon them, dehumanizing them, denying them their peoplehood. You know, all that you've been asked for is not charity,
Yeah.
right? You know, it's not to save anybody, right?
to
It
save
is just
yourself.
bring your own emancipation effort to connect with all others. This is a simple meaning of co-liberation that is mind-boggling. Some people say they cannot understand, they cannot get. But look at the real world. You know, not a fantasy world being sold to you. Look at the real world. And you see in Africa, in Asia, in Abiyala, here in Europe, the vast majority of people are in one form of rebellion or the other. You know, rebellion is in various modes of resistance.
Yeah.
And if only we can connect those modes of, you know, resistance, various modes of resistance, to feed into each other, to support each other, to grow, you know, a unifying people's power that will set us all free, because we will be setting ourselves free as a change. If we can do that, then it should not be as difficult as some people imagine it.
And I think that's the real thing. One of the stories of this non-culture, this disease, is that we're individuals and you go off and you do your therapy on your
Yeah.
own and all that stuff. And being raised in a culture that tells you there was 1066 and then there was Henry VIII and then there was the Second World War, doesn't talk about the enclosures, doesn't talk about the clearances, doesn't say that we burnt the witches. We did this to ourselves in this country. You know, this happened to us. You know, Boudica was... her daughters were raped. She was the Queen of England when the Romans came. This is our history as well, right? And you know, we know that we were offered some comfort, but comfort is the death of your own humanity. Is how I experience it. And we live in a very sort of death phobic culture that doesn't want to think about death and dying. And I think that's part of that, you know, consumerist colonized culture. It's like you don't have ancestors and you don't have next generation, you just have you and your death needs, and like it's in our bodies, just like what there's a discomfort. And the way somebody once said it to me, and I think maybe a useful way, is when you're in that so-called position of privilege, because I don't think being a non-human, you know, comforted person is especially privileged in reality. You know, obviously it comes with some things. It's like you've been given a hammer covered in nails and you're gripping onto it and the nails have gone through your skin and scabs have formed over it, and you're without actually even knowing you're doing it, you're like bashing people on the head with it. And you've got to put that hammer down, you're going to have to take your hand off and it's going to hurt some of it. But like it's hurting, and that's what this shutdown that we go into, and it is, some of it feels difficult. But God, put that hammer down, folks. It's a process of liberation, and I think this is like not just like black, white, able-bodied, disabled. It's all the stuff that goes off in this paradigm of domination, and we can't do it on our own. We've got to hold each other in it, haven't we? We've got to hold each other in it. And what does that look like? And do you know what? We don't have to invent anything. It's already out there.
Yeah.
There are really ancient technologies of healing.
Yes.
And, we have some modern tools and technologies which might mean we can come and be on some calls together and bring our gifts,
Yes.
And that's what when you're saying it's not charity, it's like, good, that whole thing of like, what each of us need and what each of us can bring is like the first step to me of deep human connection. And don't make any assumptions about what you might be needing and what you can bring to get out of that charity mindset. I mean, what a liberation. It should be fun, playful as well, and empathetic and all the rest of it.
I think, Gail, you're speaking to why I put the co in front of liberation. And 2 years ago it was that word that was hollering to me around XR's need, actually Extinction Rebellion's need, and so this fear that you talk about that has gathered speed in these last thousands of years, right? This fear has gathered speed. And it's gathered speed in what can we call it, a non-culture, some kind of dismembering of our togetherness, right? Because the most frightening thing for any human being, for any mammal, is to be alone.
Yeah.
The fear of abandonment, right? So we are stuck. There's a stickiness and a stuckness in this fear of aloneness, profound aloneness and profound isolation, where there's no agency, there's powerlessness. So therefore, of course, it's not me, it's out there, it's for me to petition, it's for me to lobby, it's for me to beg, it's for me to ask, it's for me to demand. It's not within us. Now, that is for me that primary spell of separation that we're in from this gathered speed of fear, that presents us with the how, right? The number one thing then, the number one way back is this togetherness, is the reconnection. The reconnection with one another, the reconnection, the intergenerational reconnection to our ancestors, to the remembering of who we are, who we've become, where did we come from, right? The reconnection to the Great Mother, the reconnection to the noosphere, to what I call that we are part of a universe that is conscious, and there's a conversation that we're in there. There's a communication, there's a connection we're in there, right? There's all these ways of lostness that this whiteness and Western so-called culture sits in, that we are wanting to remember. So there is a how, the beauty, and it's so simple. It's so simple. This is the very wonderful and exciting thing. It's about finding many ways of being together.
But also
the many ways of love together.
Daring to go amongst peoples who have no option but to be the change.
Yes.
And that is the majority of peoples in the majority world.
Absolutely.
For whom they know there is nobody.
There's nobody.
Except they have to do it for themselves. And they're doing it. Right? And if only we could venture to go reach out to them, go amongst them, invite them into our spaces, right? Instead of thinking, we can play some white savior for them, but go out amongst them, invite them into our own space. And this is what XRISN is all about. It is bringing those people into the spaces, within and outside of, XR, in the global north, so that people can see that these are people
Yes.
more human
Yes.
than human.
Yes.
Yes. Who are reaching out with love,
Yes.
right? And if there's any weapon they wield, it's not the guns and the bombs and so on that are rained upon them from this part of the world. It is just their hearts, their minds, their spirits of resistance, calling forth the human being, in others, like them. And that is really what we need to face. And that is what being a change is all about, as far as I'm concerned. It's just daring to see the human being in other human beings, and to embrace them, in the wider embrace of our Mother Earth. And as we say, from the Ewe community of our indigenous Beto Nation, to dare to experience Miano Benono, to dare to experience how living the life of Mother Earth is truly like. And that is the only thing that will make you overcome that fear. When you know that the life that will emancipate you is the very life, natural life of our own great Mother Earth. And all you have to do is to pluck up the courage to dare to live like that.
Yes. I think what you're talking about there, Kofi, is the turning towards life, right? And it presents, though, for us in our conversations and in our ways of thinking about the ways of working, thinking about what our own agreements might be, thinking about systemic commitments, we've called them, it presents real places of reimagining what the relationship is. Just as an example, when you talk about us going back to her and back and to the communities that know this already, that's very different from the dominant politics here, which talks about inclusion. As if, there's an includer and an including, and we're still just the ones that need to be included.
Into what?
It's still the power over, it's so subtle, but it's and it presents a sea change, right? There's a whole paradigm to shift here, right? So that's the kind of grit of the work, isn't it? That's what we're in and what we've been in for 3 years.
Absolutely.
Or more.
Absolutely.
And discovering it and meeting the resistance and still wanting to come back again and again, right? Into the relationship with this amazing movement that we have co-created. But wanting to come back maybe with some other source energy right now. That's what I'm sensing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I'm sensing.
And I think it's what I'm thinking of, just listening to everyone. The word that's coming up for me is also sacrifice. What we have to sacrifice, because people have become accustomed to being a certain way, relating in a certain way, and people have become stuck to that. A lot of the time they know it's not serving them. They know it's not bringing out that deep joy, even that love within, that it's actually imprisoning. But we have to be able to let go of that which is no longer serving us.
There it is.
And one of the things, apart from sacrifice, that I think is really important to mention in the context of being the change is dealing with the barriers to us ushering in and being the change. And there have been barriers, let's face it, within the movement of Extinction Rebellion and also outside in wider society. There are many barriers. And I also think it's important for us to speak into what those barriers are. And I'm looking at you, Gail, because for me, so I'm not, you're racialised as white, obviously I'm not. But I think my perception is that part of the challenge of also this sacrifice are for those who have been racialized as white.
Yes. Yes.
And what it means when there's someone like you who is going against the grain,
Yes.
as what Kofi has spoken about in terms of the generations of people like you, who have had the courage to go beyond what has been determined or what has been put in place, or that this is who you should be and what your sense of hierarchy should be on the planet.
Yeah.
And the notion that someone like you would be seen as a race traitor, if I can use those words, these are some of the barriers. So when people are saying, I don't get it, I don't understand, it's because of what that represents and their fear that they themselves may be called on to do the same.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey in the last few months for me. I mean, I've been through a personal thing of having to face a possible death that I'm not going to face due to a genetics test, and in a way that's been part of my journey. You just have to look at your life in the face at times, so what a gift that was. But what was happening around that time as well was to say, we're 3 years in, there's going to be this nonsense COP process, other colleagues are going to be trying things like Insulate Britain. We need to lift ourselves into a new evolutionary way of thinking about what we're doing. It's time to make a leap and, base it on lots of ideas and conversations and so on. And like my experience of doing that and saying we can't, we have to be visionary and we can't do the visionary piece as white folks without our visionary, and here they are, as far as I'm concerned, folks of colours and cultures, at the heart of it. And I've just experienced in my way something that felt like a betrayal and a marginalisation. And like, there's confusion. I'm not. There's no walls being put up here, but there's just. I think one of the things I really feel what happened was with both these experiences was a sense of liberation. Actually, it was like, why don't I just work with people that want to do this stuff? Like, why is it? Some of us we feel like we're really pushing water up a hill, and I think that. The sort of, we can use lots of different language around the patriarchal domination paradigm, white supremacy. It's got such a push energy. It's always fucking pushing for something. And I just don't think, and I don't mean that there aren't times we have to work hard and we put ourselves on the line and all the rest of it. It's not, I'm not frightened of working hard and trying stuff and going through some fires together. And this is part of what's happened here, We've had some shouting matches, some of us, haven't we? And we've been through difficulties, and it's about, like, I'm with you through this one. But I think it's, the other side of that is that there's an attraction energy in the universe. This is, we sort of, I have a background in science, we talk about entropy and that things deteriorate, but actually the force of the universe somehow, it seems to be, is attraction. Like single cells somehow got together. There's bits of fungus that are in our bodies, the mitochondria in our own cells comes from bacteria, like weird stuff happens in nature, and there's an attraction force, and I feel like that's what we need to bring through, is the attraction force that sits here. And it is love, of course, and it sounds corny saying it, and it is love, but it's as, you quote Martin Luther King, it's love without justice is insipid. It does have to have those times when we feel challenged, and we say, like, no, this is not going to happen without each other. And, like, I don't know what that looks like. And I suppose that's the other thing as well. Like, I feel like there's a lot of obvious things to do, probably. And I really feel that this has to be our young ones at the centre. Like, I'm really excited by what Radical Restart came out of XRU for doing around deschooling, the decolonisation work that's going off. But there's something here that's okay to not know, like we haven't got a plan, we're going to roll out a plan, I know how to do it, just do this, do that. I've had, colleagues telling me you just have to keep it simple. Like, simple is relationship, And the sort of sociopath within us, the narcissist within us, the nihilist within us, we're not focusing on relationship, and this system will promote that to certain, within us and amongst us to certain positions. And slow down, folks. I want to maybe finish by saying I think it's the winter here, and I know others amongst us need to rest. I hope we get a rest. And it's like what the earth asks for us at this time is to put our seeds into the ground. You know, there's so much desperate energy around there, and that's the fear body. It is desperate times, but it's been desperate for a long time. We're just on the same desperate curve. There's magic in nature. You know, I mean, reading Paul Hawken's book about the Azolla fern that cooled the planet. I mean, there are things that we can do with nature that will do things quickly, but it's not going to happen until we're together, right? So we're putting some seeds into the earth this winter, and I hope that there's some resting happens, actually, to
I
see
think
what
that
grows.
people just have to learn to live, as you say, learn to trust and live the life of Mother Earth. You know, I think the greatest pathology of whiteness has been this, delusion and illusion that you could dominate Mother Earth, right? And therefore you remove it from the living being that she is, the mother to all that she is, and then start violating her because you just want to extract, extract to satisfy not your natural needs but greed, all this overconsumption is really gluttony. It is sadism in its the worst unnatural, form. And if only people can learn, to live the life of Mother Earth. I was asked once in one of these major TV programs, actually when I went, speaking on behalf of Extinction Rebellion, and I was talking about the importance of learning from the indigenous peoples, of the world, and they are trusting, of Mother Earth, and they are trying to live according to the natural laws. Say, so you want us to, strip naked and be in this, flimsy clothes with spears and clubs and hunting? That was how. That was how.
Off camera, I hope.
No, on camera. Actually, I'm looking for that clip. I've never seen it.
God.
And of course that I wasn't given even a chance to respond to that, right?
Oh my goodness.
I just went away feeling very sorry for this person, right? If that person knew what that life meant, when you can wake up and see the beauty and, plenty of Mother Earth around you, you are not in a hurry. You take your time, to, as they do in my village, you pluck a leaf, you pray, because you are taking something from nature, right? To kill something for food, you pray, you go through rituals, to respect other beings on this planet on which you depend, right? And in that you see your own, self as that part of that Mother Earth, and the beauty of the air, just roaming free, without all this accumulation of clothes. I mean, people go to almost Oxford Street almost every week to buy new clothes, right? Accumulate shoes, accumulate bags, accumulate all these things. You don't need all of that. You just need your human self, and other beings around you to enjoy what real life is. And if those people knew why all these multimillionaires, would die, to own pieces, of land in those parts of the world, just to be able to wake up, and look, at the skies, and the stars and the beauty of this, that alone has a healing, which no pharmaceutical industry can provide for you. So I think there is an educational work that needs to be done. But education in terms of action learning. If people can forget about all these tourist trips they make, to other parts of the world and just go out, into those communities, particularly communities of resistance, the value of land, the value of everything around them, and they can take them through, the journeys of what life means for them, I'm sure that they'll have a better appreciation of not only of that kind of life, but also of the human being that they are. And the fact that life in this place is so far removed, from what, human beings should believe. And I want to, end this on this. You see, it was no accident that here, when, enslaved, Africans were brought here, and those also who escaped, from their so-called masters and mistresses, were looking for who, to build, new relationships with. They went into various, parts of this country and encountered various, movements. One of the stories that has not been properly told is the story of the likes of Robert Wedderburn, William Davidson, and those who, joined the Spenceans, which is a society founded by Thomas Spence. That's in the debate about industrialization, and development in this country, insisted that people must be returned to their land. That the basis for any human development, in the true sense, is land-based, right? And that they must undo the laws of the enclosures and bring back land and equitably distribute it to everybody. And if those people, their revolutionary pursuits, had won, we would be thinking not just of a different Britain, but of a world without the climate and ecological crisis. So the battles we are fighting today are not new battles. They have been fought over and over and over again, by Europeans who insisted on their European indigeneity until it was robbed of them with this myth of whiteness. Right? And whiteness has been, a violent imposition on Europeans as on everybody else in the world. And if only the young people particularly, that's why it's important to look to the future that is emerging, in our present, in terms of what the global majority versus is doing, what Radical Restart is doing, what the XR Affinity Youth, network, is planning to do, and doing so in collaboration endeavors with their peers across the world. They're not, working on an Insulate Britain project, right? They are working on a global project where locally they unify their forces, with their peers and their communities of resistance across the world, and ensure that those communities, work together in collaboration so that they can rediscover community in these parts of the world. And I think that is a real challenge. For those who are afraid of what collaboration means, look to your young.
Kobina.
Who are daring, to venture where, some of those who should have known better are afraid to go.
What you're saying is reminding me, Kobina, so, it's, we have an attachment, some of us, to a theory of change, right? As if we could know what the change might be, or how.
We could fully know.
We could fully know, right?
Before we start even.
So what the not knowing feels to me part of is that if the work is of repair, and if the work is of coming back to our young ones to say, what do you need now? what's your life force telling you? What's your because every generation is an evolution, right? So they're carrying the seed of the next human evolution. And so how could we know unless we go back into that relationship with people and our young ones who are closer to that knowing? They're closer to that knowing. It's true of the indigenous as well. It's true of matrifocal societies too, that because they're in deeper relationship, because there's more interconnection and interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh calls it, there might be more knowing of something worth knowing, right? And yet, what we've been doing here in Extinction Rebellion, and it's not wrong, because we want to know, and because actually we've been making some good guesses. Social movement theory offers us some good guesses, right? The work of Paul Engler and all those amazing Erica Chenoweth and all these people that we've been leaning into, they all offer something.
Yeah, but you see,
And
that offering can only make sense if people open up to what this, movement ought to be, has to be,
For
right?
sure.
A learning movement, a movement where we all come with what we know and admit what we don't know.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Where we engage in shared learning, where we bring our curiosities, to actually critically share and interrogate each other, right? And not be afraid, of stretching further the horizons, of knowledge and, human existence and, knowing that on this planet, as you said earlier, this is a wonderful, magical planet.
It really is.
What it is capable of.
Yes.
In the same way that what we as human beings are even capable of. We haven't even scratched the tip of the iceberg. The power of our humanity.
Absolutely. Yes.
Not our inhumanity. In fact, our inhumanity actually diminishes our power. It is our humanity. Stretching it to the full, exploring to the full, unraveling it to the full. That gives us the power to do the impossible. And that with the power of our Mother Earth. What is it that we cannot achieve? And I think, rather than scaring the young people, trying to pull them back from critically learning, because that is what life is. You learn from the past, you learn from your present, and you dare to venture, into the future, right? And that is why indigenous communities, we say, we are societies of the past, the present, and the future. That interconnection, gives us immense power. And this is what being the change is, and this fear that if I do something, I lose my life, then I'm gone forever. No, that is just part of living, right? And we have to get that. If you get that, if you are able to overcome this fear of death, because you see it as part of living, right? And your purpose in life really is seen as a challenge of, how will, I be valued in the communion of people after I've physically left. Because real life truly begins when you're physically gone. That's when, your footprints in the sands of time, it takes generations to come to make sense of those footprints. And if your footprints are so destructive, right, that it is seen as inimical to the lives of generations yet to come, then you have finished. You haven't lived. You lost that chance of living into eternity. And these are the things that we should think about.
Yes.
This is what being the change is.
Yeah.
Being the change not for a moment.
No.
Being a change for all time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Whoa. Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. Kobina, I feel like we've done a lot of talking, and I feel really drawn to ask you, and Esther, I know you've not said any much for a little while, but the both of you, perhaps, as to how this going backwards to feel what we were and who we are, and this who we are now, and then what's calling us from the future. As Kofi says, being the change of all time.
Yeah.
What does that mean for you, do you think?
No, these are really, really super important questions, and because our generation and our generations have been forced just by the shit show that we've inherited, to engage what the real end goal and the logical end, or the end of where we're actually heading is. And it's because of that I think we have to we've been facing up to a very serious question about, how far are we prepared to go? But not only just that, actually, but to say, what is this for? Because, we are a generation that could be looking at the finish line of so many well-planned projects, all of the attritional gains that we've made, and all the times that we've been cut down, or that we've had, at least, what I really respect and appreciate is that we have the eldership that's able to say, look, here is where we have failed. And so for all of those people actually within the movement and outside who carry on this process of saying, look, what you're doing, there is no chance for it, or are disinterested in what young people are actually trying to say at this time, at the risks that some of our siblings are putting themselves every day. People within the Affinity Youth Network who are in, putting themselves in places where are, serious violence, to learn and to experience what life is like for the majority of the world's peoples. If there are people still who want to look away and try and do tried and tested failed methods to lead more young people down that route, then we're not interested in it. And that's what being the change represents for the young people who actually see this as the only language that speaks to us. And it's the only language that speaks to any of our generations. And it's the only language that does justice to our ancestors or our parents who fought to come here, maybe to this country, who have lost their lives in this country, not seeing the finished project of the liberation that we all want. And so I think that really just means that, we don't have time for the people that want to hold us back at all. And that's why people are getting on with the work and aren't even actually kind of disinterested in processes which aren't about engaging, the truth that we're stepping into, because we've had to learn a lot of hard lessons quite quickly. Because we can see just the full scale of where this government is prepared to go, where this establishment is prepared to go. There's an establishment that is currently legalizing and using the language of mass genocide being justifiable.
Yeah.
And people want to still carry on the same bullshit of NGOizing the struggle, engaging young people in fake strategies, trying to get them to believe in processes which we know are broken. Trying to pay them off to do utter nonsense. Trying to remove them from looking at, what the majority of our siblings are going through. And that's what we do not have time for, and that's what we actually need. We do still rely on the support of those who can see that this is what young people are seeing at this time, and this is the vision of all of those who won't be named, who won't make it onto camera, but who are actually answering that question that you've talked about. To say that my footprint is about time after me. My footprint is going to be discovered, or may not be discovered, but that doesn't matter, because that is what I actually believe in. And so just a week ago we were in court to try and dare and make this challenge of what the British establishment is prepared to say to young people at this time. And there were some really factual truths. They are prepared to say that your family life is irrelevant. They are currently saying that your deaths, if you've got younger children than me, they are currently actually saying that we are reserving the right to kill you. And they say this bold face with lawyers who aren't even prepared enough to stand by those defences, who are blushing when they're saying it because they realise that this is actually crazy.
Yeah.
And there is a judge currently having to make that decision, which is abundantly clear to us that there is justice that we are working on and that your institutions are failing. And I think because that is like so tangibly clear right now, that all we have, that we need to just, do the last thing that's left, which is to unify people's power and build the alternative. That is where, we have to go. And that's why I think one of the last things that was said in that court is that we actually don't have any doubt anymore that history will absolve us. And those words are words that have been taken from, the leaders that we've had before us who have dared to make that change and make that assertion. That's the reality that we all face. For us to say, look, we are the global majority. We all remain completely, very much colonized because we all remain without the entire emancipation of each other. And that's, that's where we're at, and that's where we can really go. And so being the change has to open up that space, and it is opening up that space, and that's where that's where we sit as young people. In fact, we've been long waiting for this, and we welcome it.
You've really articulated what we've guessed at is the definition of co-liberation, which is that a knowing and a being that my safety and my freedom and my flourishing depends on yours and yours on mine. I really depend on you and you really depend on me for all of it, for our whole life, And I think you've beautifully articulated that, Kobina, so thank you.
No.
Esther, I'm just kind of thinking that I reckon you have something profound to say, because you always do. You've got that face on. I know that face really well now.
You do. What does it look like? Well, for me, very practically, because I think sometimes when we talk like this in this visionary way, because people's lives are about survival and just kind of staying on this treadmill a lot of the time. They don't take the time for themselves to even just imagine that things can be different. And if you can't imagine things can be different, then you are not going to put the work in terms of how you live your life on a daily basis. So as a reparationist, now 20 years, I feel everything that we're talking about, for me, I don't disassociate or dislocate from the movement that birthed me, as it were, in terms of my own political activism and the vision, which is actually an intergenerational vision about restoring that balance that I spoke about in the beginning. For us, the highest version of it in African people's memory, living memory, we would refer to as Ma'at, which is depicted as a goddess, scales of justice, from ancient Kemet, otherwise known as Egypt today, and also Ubuntu, from the Bantu-speaking peoples of Southern Africa, which is really about our humanity. What makes us human is also about how we interface with other humans. And also our Mother Earth. That is part of how we define ourselves as human beings. And so in our conceptualization, in particular from certain formations that I'm part of, such as the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe, which also birthed the Stop the Mangamizi, We Charge Genocide Ecocide campaign, with others, we refer to Ma'atu Buntuman, which is the vision of a repaired Africa, which is a global Africa, incorporating those of us in the diaspora, in what we refer to in the diaspora as Ma'atu Buntu Jamas. These are African heritage communities for national self-determination. They are kind of like model communities where we're repairing ourselves, deep adaptation, transformative adaptation, living on the land, growing our own food, glocalism, all of the things that a lot of people are converging around today, from different ideological and political and cultural standpoints and stuff like that. And that connects with similar processes happening, real processes, which we refer to on the continent of Africa as Sankofa Homes. And there is one particular community that we're very connected to in Abatime. So Oshe, Tekpo, the seventh in Ghana, West Africa, is part of that, working with many of us here who are rematriating.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Which is not just a physical return process to our homelands, but it's also that spiritual, cultural repair.
Yes.
And it's based on land.
Yes. Yes.
And as we would say, each other again.
Yes.
Yeah? Even if we speak English as a colonial tongue,
Yes.
we still have to learn the ways of
Yes.
our people, a return to our indigeneity.
Yes.
Yeah? But that's not just about us as African people, because we have birthed humanity,
Yes.
and
Yes.
we know this. Yeah, so our bloodlines run throughout all human beings.
Yes.
If you're a human being, our bloodlines run through you. You go to every place on the planet, you go back deep enough and you are going to find people who are melanated.
Your black mother.
You're going to find that.
Yeah.
Can't escape it. Any people on the planet, including in Europe.
Yeah.
Including in
Yeah.
Europe.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that is this notion of the being the change as a reparationist. It is about concrete processes that are underway.
Yes.
And we know that even this vision for African reparations, which is actually about a civilizational challenge. It's a civilizational shift. It's not just about us as African people. Because we are everywhere. And when we move, we're conscious of this. The whole world
Yes.
follows in our path. So we have a historic mission and duty that we're very conscious of. And it's about also helping to catalyse in the spirit of co-liberation those self-repair processes of other members of the human family. Okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so we refer to that global process as the making and establishment of Ubuntu Dunia, which basically means a multipolar world
That's
of
right.
global justice. Yes, that's premised on that.
Yes.
That's the only way, because what we're grappling with, in the minutiae, which is really huge and has become, perhaps one of the biggest issues on the planet, is obviously the impact of the climate and ecological crisis.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But unless we're able to be the change and transition to this path, which is not a new path.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the way of our mothers.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, our Earth Mother.
It is.
And those who for me as a woman, claiming that with no apology,
Yes.
it is about, this is what our grandmothers, all the
Yes.
mothers in my line have taught us. That was
Yes.
our role.
Yes.
To reinstall the culture. Yeah, because women give birth.
Yes.
Okay, and that responsibility about teaching our young their culture and what it means to be a human being is so important, and has been, again, denigrated and demonized. And, we've gone through various liberation phases which have come out of reaction to this imbalance.
Yes.
But sometimes have created other imbalances.
Yes.
And so we've got all these eons of learning,
Yes.
experiential knowledge that shows us who we have been, who we have become, but most importantly, who we are still to be.
Yes.
Yeah, who we are still to be. That's why being the change is just essential. And I need it. I think we all need it. It's part of. Otherwise, what have our lives been about?
Yeah.
What have our lives been about? Because whatever we've done, and I'm sure we've all done really great things, irrespective of our ages and how we embody ourselves, but it's not sufficient on its own. There are gaps. And the connection between us all and what we represent, what we stand on, those lineages that we have to restore and reclaim with pride, that we've been denied access to and connection to, I believe is what is going to envelop this birthing, because we're in a process of birthing.
We're co-labouring, yes.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yes.
So yeah, that's what it represents to me, and I feel it's as I said, for us it's not theoretical. We're doing this.
Yes.
All of our reparations processes, which extend from us to community, to this sense of an obligation to other members of the human family, and ultimately to reconnect us, redirect us back to into being sacred connection and relationship with our Earth Mother. And all around the world, when I've travelled and everything I learn about indigenous people and other communities, everyone seems to be on that path.
Yes.
We might use different language to describe it, but ultimately it's a similar path.
I did want to thank you, Esther. I want to speak to one aspect of that, which feels important to name, which is there are some false versions of it around, I think. And it was something I was trying to say earlier about that sense of rootlessness within this non-cultural domination paradigm that you see in activist spaces. Anthea Lawson's just written a book about the entangled activist, and it's how we end up doing the stuff that is the thing that we're supposed to be changing, right? And I just think there's some clues for us, and I especially speak to white people here, but not just. If you're trying to be an activist, but you're extracting from yourself, to the point of burnout, exhaustion, or trying to extract from other people, you're trying to pressurise them through fear or whatever, you're doing the thing, Or if what you're doing is not relational, it's somehow, it's not in relationship to other people, it's not willing to walk towards relationship. Somehow it's just like, we've got some stuff to do, so like, let's just get I've heard it called the fluffy stuff out of the way, It's not got relationship in it. You're doing the thing,
Yes.
But and if you're feeling that you've got to push for something, power over, you're doing the thing. But I also want to say though, any sense of superiority, if there's a glimpse of this in me now, I'm doing the thing, and it shows up in these kind of like half-baked things that get offered, especially in this non-culture that I'm in, the sort of so-called spiritual cultures. I've heard somebody talk about light, rather than white superiority, and light superiority. I'm more spiritual than you. The sort of superiority shows up again and again. I know better. I'm right. Like
ego.
And like it's all we're all going to have it at times, and that's where we need to hold each other. And in the liberal ways in which that we let that stuff happen. So. And it's not about, I'm not trying to shame any of us, it's like the relationships are open, I think. And I think part of sort of the being the change piece is, let's see what we can offer to each other. I'm all up for, forms of civil disobedience and other actions that we might take. And I think it's, but what I want to know is that it's got roots in it,
Yeah, thank you, Gail. I think what you both have, and we're also, Kobina, where you ended as well, is we're in an invitation, aren't we? We're making a deep invitation. Because none of us know. We have some ideas that we've shared here around what we need from our very souls, from our very hearts, from a returning and remembering, from our mothering principles, from indigenous wisdom, from ancient lineages, from our rebellious pasts. There are many, from social movement theory. There's many ways of knowing. That's pluriversality. The many ways of knowing, and the uncountable ways of knowing. The ways that come through relationship and relationship only. And so that's the return to the invitation is for relationship. We've all been through these 3 and a bit years. We've been in all kinds of relationships with each other in this movement. And we've made mistakes. And we've made failings. And we've been wrong, we've been right. Or we've known and we haven't known. But what is left, the only thing that could be left is relationship. And there's a sorry, you know, and there's a forgiveness. And there's a repair there that I think we're inviting you and us into, to being with us together. Because there really is that need. There's a fundamental need for that one-heartedness. There's no doing this without each other. There's no doing this without belonging to each other. There's no doing this without that prayer, that magnificent prayer. For us to be that one human family. Being together, being the change together. So this is an invitation. Thank you.